Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. Have a seat. Let me dispense with some business very quickly. Just to mention our secretary's report from last meeting. We had a speaker, Garrett Gastfield, who is a senior in high school, who his Boy Scout, Eagle Scout project is to go to Greenwood Cemetery and to clean up the cemeteries there of the Civil War veterans. And they also placed a bench facing each area, both Confederate and the Southern, removing excess brush and debris. He brought pictures of that. We had our Christmas basket raffle that was won by his grandfather, who bought tickets, and that was one way that we make money, and that was raffled off. And then after that, some old geezer led us in Christmas songs, interspersed, and his very lovely wife played the piano. It's in the newsletter if you want to see the picture, and with letters and stories from the Civil War. And we got out just a little bit early. We like to at least close by 9 o'clock if at all possible. What happened on January the 28th? In 1861, Louisiana state troops took possession of Fort McComb, not far from New Orleans. In 1862, there was a skirmish. Just about every day of the war, there was a skirmish somewhere. There were two in Greenburgh, Kentucky, and Lebanon, Missouri, which shows you when the battles were still fought in the northern tier of states. In 1863, Sheila, I'd like to have some more background on this. A St. Louis mass meeting ratified the Emancipation Proclamation. And I've not heard that if that was an official act of the state, whether it was symbolic or whatever, because Missouri was a battleground state. It was it never entered the South, but there were enough programs there that caused that problem. But at least it was ratified on January 28th. Lincoln had signed it or proclaimed it on January the 1st. In 1864, there was a skirmish at Dallas, Arkansas. And in 1865, President Jefferson Davis named 3 commissioners to hold informal talks with the federal authorities. And if you saw the movie Lincoln, it was looked like that Lincoln really didn't want to close a war early, giving any advantage to the South. But the 3 of them met on along the James River with some war commissioners from the North, and they talked. And basically the North said, "Would you like to surrender?" And the South said, "Only with whatever." And the movie made it sound like it was fated from the very beginning that nothing was going to happen. But that idea of peace early was pretty strong. If you got the newsletter, we had several trivia questions we'd like to put out here. And so if you read your newsletter, you've had a chance to research them. And David, I bet you've got all the answers back there. Number 1, who or what was Fire Eater? Now, I knew the answer to that right away. A fire eater. Okay. We got Tom and we got Rick. Well, most people think it says you got to watch who was fire eater, not what was a fire eater. Because the fire eater were the nicknames of the rabid Southern people who wanted to have the war come on at any cost. Edwin Ruffin at Charleston wanted to fire the first shot because he was a fire eater. He wanted to see the war begin. But it was Albert Sidney Johnson's horse was fire eater. I never knew that until Sheila handed me the answers. Now, you Civil War buffs, anybody watching PBS this last 2 weeks? They're running the Civil War series right now. Not Mercy Street. There's another one on Battle of Shiloh. What did you notice interesting? Because they showed in this last one Sidney Johnson getting shot off his horse right there. And he bled to death. It was behind the back of his knee and all that. It was well given. But what was interesting about this modern interpretation of that battle? You notice what I noticed? When the Confederates came out waving the flag, they used the national flag instead of the battle flag. And I'm not sure when that was filmed, but I'm wondering if already the sensitivity towards the battle flag is making people who are doing documentary now, let's not be so controversial, and let's give them the flag, the national flag, and then the battle flag won't be there. Did you notice that? I noticed that they're waving this flag. By the way, this is the original Stars and Bars. A lot of people think that the X one is the Stars and Bars, but this was the original one. Okay, Roger, Sheila, we got two chairs up here. Bring Roger up here. He likes to sit close. We got two, and you can lead him here.
We got two more than that too.
Steve,
Yes.
I have an announcement that I just got from Joan about tonight, about a show. There's a show on tonight at 10 o'clock. It's called The Road to Andersonville.
Yes.
Did you know about it? It's on Channel 15 WDSC.
I think this is the same series that's going on right now.
Oh,
And
is
they
that
did
right?
Shiloh Lecture. Well, it may be. It's that same series.
Okay.
I've got to go home and record that.
Yeah, me too.
Question number 2 on January trivia. Admiral David Porter, commanding the Mississippi Naval Squadron, had an oddity concerning horses. What was it? Strange? I don't even know the answer. Rick, do you know that one?
I'm sorry.
Admiral David Porter had a strange thing to do with
Yeah, I'm a
horses.
little aware of it. He was going up to Mississippi, and they hit a lot of snarls in the river, and he requested to have a horse. And they brought him a horse, and he's riding the horse. I think he ran into the woman whose plantation it was stolen from. So I think that, that was kind of...
I've got this for an answer. He loved to gallop from shore and lead onto his vessel by the gangplank.
Okay, that could be the same.
Whatever, yeah. Okay. Here's one that most of you Civil War buffs know. What was the largest cavalry encounter of the war? Most cavalry involved in the war.
Yellow Tavern?
Good guess.
Brandy Station.
Brandy Station. Brandy Station. Yellow Tavern, I think, is where Jeff Stewart got killed.
Right, he was killed
Brandy
there.
Station was 64. Towards the end of the war, it was one of the largest meeting of that. Okay, number 4. What was salt horse? Salt horse.
I think it's going to be a naval term, but it's pork and beef packaged in brine. And that's where you get the salt.
Army issued beef so saturated with salt, the troops had to soak it for days to get the salt flavor out of it. Okay? And what was the name of General Meade's horse? I'm looking around here. Rick? Oh, okay.
Old Baldy.
Old Baldy. All right. Very good. All right. Good. Let me make just a brief word about our treasury report. This is our January meeting. We try not to do much business during the meetings, especially if visitors don't want to know this. But for our members, you need to know this. Dave has done the accounting for last year, and here's the bottom line. Last year, we had income of $1,696, and we had expenses of $1,724. So we operated with just $27 difference. And in our bank account, we have $3,400. So Dave keeps track of that, but the important thing is, it's time to re-up. And he's back there ready to take your $25 dues, and he will be glad to give you change or whatever, and please do that. Here's the main thing that you need to know about our organization. Pine Castle Women's Club gives us free rent. We used to be at Mark Center, and Mark Center, the city, is sky-high rent on everything. I don't want to tell you how bad it is for small non-profit organizations to find a good place to meet. So I appreciate you folks that have come from the other side of town down to South Orlando to get here. Now, they ask that we make donations here. Shirley, who runs the place here, Shirley Crawford runs the place. And so we have this little donation box right here. And we encourage you, there's my first buck right there. Sometime this evening, if everybody can put in a buck, we make a donation so that they will continue for it to be free. Otherwise, they might have to start charging this rent. I saw the sign out there, to rent this building, call this number. So organizations like this always are looking for money. we're going to have a board meeting very soon here, and I'm going to be recommending to the board that we will take the donations and whatever doesn't come up, we're going to try to make it to about $20 a month for them. And that will make them so much happier that we are here and they blank out this night for us once a month. The other thing is that, do we have a donation on the table?
No, we usually use that one, there's a different one.
Okay, well, we will have something there. We're going to put out a bunch of refreshments at the halftime, and if anybody appreciates having a soda and some snacks, you can put some money in that. That goes in the thing.
Wait,
Yes, Judy?
I was gonna say, when Steve, was talking about last year's budget, one of the benefits of being a member of the club is, a very economical price for the budget. I mean, for the banquet, all those B words. So that's one of the benefits of membership. And this year, we should be, if everybody joins up, we should be a little bit better match.
Okay.
Because our speaker expenses won't be quite as high this year.
Well, thank you for reminding me about the banquet. The banquet will be in April. We'll be giving you more information. But what we did this last year is the banquet was only $10 per member and $15 for guests, which is very economical since mainly it was Olive Garden food, and it was bountiful, it was delicious. So we make this good, nice banquet and have a good speaker. Judy?
I'd like to thank the host and hostess tonight who put on this beautiful spread.
Okay.
It was wonderful of them, a nice surprise for me. And if anybody else would like to take a month and bring, set up, we have drinks, so you don't really need the drinks, but if you want to set up a little food, and then people usually bring stuff. So if you want to sign up for that, there you go.
Okay, and this is an announcement for our group
Why don't we
here.
pass it
That,
around?
no, let's just leave it right there and let people come by. We're a good party. We'll not mention it now. Judy is our commissary person, but I have made a ex officio appointment, and we have a new board member and officer of the club. It's in the newsletter right there. Our former president, Rick Gunther, who's moved back into town, is now our quartermaster general, which means he's going to make sure that we got supplies and keep things going, and sit with the board and give us his expertise that he's given many years in the club here. Thank you, Rick. Okay, we have up here some of our business cards, and I'll leave them kind of up here. I'll probably put them over here. And Marilyn wants us to just tell the members that that the Renegers Battle of the Townhouses Plantation is this weekend, Saturday and Sunday. And if you know someone that you would like to invite to the Civil War Roundtable, you want to take 2 or 3 cards and
Take
pass
5
them.
or 10.
Yeah, take 5 or 10. Don't grab the whole box right there, but if you have somebody specific in mind that you would like to invite to meetings, this is a good way of doing it. And any of you guests that want to grab a card, put it in your pocket, and remember that the 4th Thursday is your date with history. Okay? 4th Thursday. Over here on this table at the halftime, Falcon is going to be taking tickets for our book raffle, $1 for one.
What are they? It's a dollar a piece or,
6 for $5.
6 for 5. 6 for
and I
5.
think I have 5 books out there.
We got
and
5
then
books
there's
we'll be giving
magazines.
away. You can look them at the table, and you can buy those at the halftime. Okay, I've done January trivia, secretary's business, and mentioned Mount Dora. I got the business cards. I've talked about the donations. I've welcomed the guests and so forth. I'm so happy that so many of you made it. And I remember some names. I remember Steve, because that's my name. I remember Dolores back there, who said she could almost walk here. Ed Hughes, we hoped, he came from Oviedo. You got to really want to be here. You come from Oviedo. And Ed is an author, and perhaps may be giving us a program sometime in the future. And all the rest of you, we usually ask our guests to stand and identify themselves and ask their favorite Civil War character, but it would extend the meeting so much tonight with all of our guests. Let's just get to our speaker, okay? Very good. Tonight, Marilyn, would you like to introduce them?
Yes.
Okay, good.
when I cue you, can you knock on the door? I've been program director here for the last year, and we're very, very proud of the agenda that we got coming up. So if anybody wants a hard copy of the 11 fantastic programs that we've got this year, mapping names, guns, see me at halftime. As a football fan, I like that. Tonight, we're going to hear from John Russell and the troops of the 9th Cavalry Buffalo Soldiers. John Russell is a retired Orange County he retired from the Orange County Fire Department, but originally from Alabama. He's a living historian, leader of the troop. You've seen the fantastic picture in the newspaper. They've been doing this since 1992, oral histories. Their mission, their pride is doing oral history to recognize the brave men who did, the brave Negro men who did not get credit for their service. His unit is the only Negro colored unit in the U.S. that participates in reenactments as colored troops. They've traveled as far as West Point, down to Still, Oklahoma, all the way around the United States. So let's give a round of applause to the Buffalo Soldiers as they march in.
Can't sneak up on you, can we?
Good evening. Good evening. First off, we would like to thank you for having us here. We are here tonight to give you some of your history that you probably don't know about. Tell you about some things you may know about, but you didn't know the people who accomplished the task were Negroes. We are a multi-purpose organization. Our root group is called the Buffalo Soldiers Florida, and we've been around since 1992. Our goal has been education. We started out as a group to educate black people. Then it became a group that educated Americans, period. Because it is amazing living in this country, how ignorant on the whole we are about the country we live in. So we adapted. We started doing Civil War reenactments as the 3rd U.S. Colored Cavalry. And we expanded to the Seminole Indian Wars as Negro Seminole warriors. So in our quest to educate, we have become living historians. And our history is now stretches from 1524, when the first black man set foot in North America, that has been recorded, up to the present. And we do it as the people of that period did. To my left are our members who made it tonight. First is Trooper Richard Wilder. He's from Lakeland. Next to him, Trooper Larry McCalley from Orlando. Next to them, the big guy, that's Sergeant H.L. Williams from Webster. H.L., now since 1992, we've had a lot of people come and go. The one constant I've always had that I can count on is H.L. Williams. He's been there. That's why after 15 years, he finally made sergeant. Army moved slow back then, but when he made up his mind, he did. Now, our story, the story we want to present to you, is the story of unbridled courage,
of people who, with everything to lose, stood to gain it all by their actions. And those are the U.S. colored troops from the Civil War. From 1864 to the end of the war, more than 220,000 Negroes served in the United States Army. More than 24,000 gave their lives. And that included every branch of the military: the infantry, the artillery, light and heavy, and the cavalry. As the kids would say, when people ask what's the difference between infantry and cavalry, the cavalry were the dudes who rode horses.
Yeah.
So, what most people aren't aware of is the rich history of the U.S. colored cavalry. That in fact, there were 7 regiments that served during the Civil War. And they served through every theater of the Civil War, from the Wild West, which in the 1860s was Mississippi, to the east. Each one eventually got designated a U.S. unit, except for one, the 5th Massachusetts Colored Cavalry, the brother group to the 54th and the 55th Infantries. They kept their state designation. What is important to know about these groups, and as we present their stories, I'm kind of the mouth, I'm the interlocutor. I'll take you to a point and turn it over to somebody else. And we'll try to keep it moving and keep it interesting for you. Because if you are a historian, and then you can discover what the USCC did, and it wasn't a black cavalry unit, it was colored or Negro. What they fought for, what they surrendered, and what they accomplished. Everyone should know. Now getting to the third, we started, when basically HL and I, when we decided to do Civil War reenactments, we said, who are we going to do? Well, my knowledge of the Civil War at that time was glory. But I was like, the 54th Massachusetts, they walked a lot. And I did a reenactment as a member of the 54th, and I had a pack on my back, an infield on my shoulder, those awful shoes they made. And we marched 2 miles to a battle. And when the battle was over, I said, you know what? I got a horse. I know my buddy's got a horse. I'm not walking no more. So we became a cavalry unit. And we had to research what we were going to do, because there were times when we would go to Civil War reenactments in Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. People would look at us and go, man, your uniform looks nice, but there wasn't no colored cavalry. And that's just the opening I needed. And I would light into them. So in the 20-something years since, people have come to recognize that we can still fight. Words now. We're educated that the 3rd U.S. Colored Cavalry is here, and we're here to defend ourselves and our country. Now, the war started in 1861, and there were thousands of Negroes who took that opportunity to head north, and they wanted to enlist in the Union Army. They wanted to fight, but the Union Army wouldn't let them. The politicians were afraid that if the Southerners saw Negroes with weapons, they would lose their minds and massacre everybody. And besides, this thing is going to be over in a couple of weeks anyway. But by late 1863, it was still going strong. And President Lincoln was running out of white troops. That's the bottom line. There are a lot of the northern troops that had never seen a Negro. They weren't fighting, in their minds, to free the Negro. They were fighting to save the Union. But there were plenty who were fighting for both. So in an effort to end this conflict, the Union Congress started thinking of some way to make the Southerners surrender. President Lincoln started thinking about, well, he would give a speech that would basically lay out in the gauntlet, say, if you don't quit fighting, we're going to let the colored shoot at you. As these things were developing, different areas started organizing colored troops, even though they weren't officially allowed to. One of the places was Vicksburg, Mississippi, on October 19th of 1863, before the Emancipation Proclamation. They started organizing infantry, artillery, and a cavalry unit that was called the 1st Mississippi Colored Cavalry of African descent. That didn't seem like a big thing at the time, but in the following years, it would become a symbol of a lot of things that were changing in this country. Not through an effort of the white man fighting and dying to free the black man. The black man was going to free himself. During those first months of organization in the Vicksburg and at Carter, Vicksburg down to Natchez, Mississippi, even though they weren't official, the 1st Mississippi was organized. Now, Trooper McCallum has studied that, and he's going to talk about those first few months of the 1st Mississippi Cavalry of African descent.
Good evening. One of the things in doing the research with the Colored Cavalry that I realized is that, as the first sergeant said earlier, all of the Negroes were volunteers. And in doing the research leading up to the first winter campaign, all of the reports that came in that were given, or orders that were given by the upper brass, one of the things that I realized was a commonality there was the fact that they always mentioned the fact that they needed to motivate their colored soldiers. And I thought, why would you have to motivate a man that has never been free that wants to be free? He is highly motivated. And that was actually brought forth by Major Cook at one point in time to Colonel Osborne. Now, the first winter campaign in November of 1863, they were actually ordered to go down to Shipwick Landing. The importance of Shipwick Landing was that was one of the major port at that time for the loading and offloading of cotton, which was other than slaves, were the major industry in the South. So obviously you have to remember now, all of these people are in foreign territory. So there is nothing friendly about Louisiana or Mississippi at all. And understand this, that the campaigns that took place, the majority of the campaigns that took place during that time were skirmishes. There were some major fights, but the majority of the campaigns were skirmishes. They were not looking to fight. Their orders were very simple. As a matter of fact, there was no game plan when they came down here. But the orders were very simple. Go into the particular towns. Do not molest, rape, or burn anything. You are going to be facing an enemy. You need to try to be as friendly as you possibly can. Now, of course, the people in the area were not happy because once they showed up, they were actually under security. They were not allowed to leave their homes for obvious reasons. They're spies. They're automatically a spy. So in that winter campaign, the first campaign, there was nothing that really happened. They were actually able to accomplish the goal that they set out with in their orders, which was to get supplies and to recruit. And this was the major issue with the South, was that they were recruiting the Negroes. And that was their major goal. And this took place throughout the time that I studied, from that November until March of 1864. That was the goal of the Union Army with the Negroes at that time, was to go out, try to avoid, if all possible, but to secure supplies. One, it would cut off supplies to the Confederate Army, and to build up the forces of the colored soldiers. Thank you.
Now, one of the things that Trooper McCallum just mentioned, he mentioned Colonel Osborne. As Colonel, Edwin Osmond, who started the war with the 4th Illinois Cavalry. He was a man who had had limited to almost no contact with the Negro. His first major concern was the Union. As with a lot of the white officers who came to work with Negro units, most came in with preconceived notions. The notion that, oh, they can't do it. Well, you know, they can't follow orders. Well, what do you think we've been doing on slavery farms for 100 years? Now, there was the other concern that, you know, we'll give these colored guys guns, and the first time a white Southerner yells at them to lay down the gun, they're going to lay down the gun and go running off going lordy lordy. Well, it was quickly discovered that that wasn't the case, much to the chagrin a lot of the Confederate troops. Because when they fired on the black troops, the Negroes, they found out they had withering fire returned. And the Negro troops, believe it or not, were on a stronger mission than the Confederates. The Confederates were fighting for, among other things, their God-given right to own the Negro. The Negro was fighting for the fact that I am a man, nobody owns me but me and God. So that gives you terrible motivation. As Colonel Osborne later stated, these are the most dedicated and heroic fighting men, and he used the word men in 1864, that I have ever served with. Up and down the Mississippi Delta, including Arkansas, parts of Tennessee, Kentucky, West Alabama, and all through Mississippi and Louisiana, Colonel Osborne gained a reputation because of the men he led, as the Confederates and the civilians came to call these guys the Black Horse Cavalry. Among their ventures, there were key strategic places that the Confederates needed to stay open. They needed for supplies to travel. They needed to get equipment. They needed to be able to give their soldiers ammunition and food. Most of that in that Western theater was through Mississippi. Sergeant Williams is going to tell you about one of those places. Those of you who study Civil War history, you hear about all the great battles. You heard about Gettysburg, Bull Run, 1st and 2nd Manassas. How many of you have ever heard of the Black River Bridge? And if you leave here thinking about it, do what my wife always tells me when I ask her a question. Google. Importance of the Black River Bridge battle. That was one of the most significant battles in the Civil War because it was instrumental for U.S. Grant. You heard about him taking Vicksburg, but how did he take it?
First Sergeant was just telling me about a significant battle. I have a question for you. How many of you sitting out there can name me 3 important battles on the Civil War? Battles that changed the tide, changed the way things were moving, changed the momentum of the war. How many of you heard about this battle, Black River Creek? Black River Bridge. What it was a train trestle going across the river. And the Confederates had stockades set up across the river. They were fortified. The positions were almost impenetrable. Twice before, the Federals had sent troops to try to take this position. Because what was happening, the South was just about to invade Nashville. And that was a direct supply route, Mississippi, South Carolina. So twice, Federals had thrown seasoned troops the best of the best, to try to capture this bridge. And they couldn't do it. So, well, it's not a matter of the number of men that it's going to take to overcome this obstacle. What it's going to take is men with intestinal fortitude, men with gumption, men with desire. 3rd USCC, 3rd U.S. Public Cabinet was called in. And these men knew the obstacles that they faced, because they know twice that this position had been trying, what just could not be taken. And they know that men before them that weren't were the best of the best. And these men, when they were waiting for the bugle to sound, all these men were sitting tensed because they had something to prove. They had something to fight for. And when the bugle sounded, everybody raced up, headed towards the river. And in the face of those who were falling, the comrades falling by the side, the men continued. And when they crossed the river, was climbing the trestles, and the men were still falling from the bullets being hit, they still persevered. They still overcame, and they overpowered. And when they reached the destination, when they reached the top of the trestle, the Confederate troops stopped running away. They started leaving because they could not believe, through all that firepower, through all that lead that was fired, that was being fired, that these troops still persevered and overcame. It was out of necessity that this route was closed down, and it saved Nashville. That became a pivotal point in the war. So this is just one act of bravery that you don't hear about. This was a turning point in the Civil War. Nashville could have been taken, but it wasn't. The 3rd USCC, those gallant men, those former slaves, had more to fight for. They had their families. They had the future. And they let it all hang out. If I may, first item. In line with this, when we talk about this great battle that took place, there's one other thing I think we all should think about that we don't hear about. And that is one of being a spy. That is one of being a guide. These former slaves were asked to go back into the lion's den. They were asked to go back as guides. They were asked to go back as spies for information. And why? Well, it stands to reason. These men were born in the South. They knew the bayous. They knew the swamps. The Northerners didn't know that. They knew the language. They knew the people. They were able to slip back onto the plantations and talk to the slaves that were still there, get information, take it back to the Federals. How many of you, once you were getting out of the kitchen where it was hot, would want to get back into the fire? Huh? How many would want to do that? How many of you would risk your life to go back in and do these types of things? But this is what the men of the 3rd CC did. They had all types of duties. But one thing that stood out among everything, they were brave. They were trustworthy. They were loyal. Thank you.
One of the things that Trooper mentioned was the going back into the lion's den as spies, as guides. Those of you, how many of you like John Wayne movies? Remember the Horse Soldiers? Well, the Horse Soldiers is based on a true incident. It was the 7th Illinois plus a regiment from Iowa led by General Benjamin Grierson, Brevet Major General Grierson, and Brevet Major General Edward Hatch. The importance of these men really occur after the war. But during the war, using, I don't like to call them escaped slaves, They were men who had freed themselves. And they voluntarily led federal units on expeditions to stop the war. One of the most famous, which was depicted, and the reason I asked you about John Wayne, in that Horse Soldiers movie, with 4 regiments of Union cavalry. Now that's 4,800 men, plus animals, plus supply wagons. General Grierson led his troops from Memphis to Vicksburg, through the heart of the South, destroying supply lines, wrecking railroads, burning stuff they couldn't recover. And the Confederates never found them. Now think about that. 4,800 men on horseback, plus extra horses and wagons, in the heart of the Confederacy, and the Confederates couldn't find them. Meanwhile, they wreaked havoc from Tennessee, parts of Arkansas, down into Vicksburg. This was in late 1863. Now in 1864, he did it again. But this time, he had 2 Negro regiments with him. The 3rd U.S. out of Mississippi, and the 4th U.S. out of Louisiana. And again, they cut through the heart of the Confederacy, the heart of the Western Theater, where General Grant was fighting to bring complete control of the Mississippi over to the Union Army. Again, 4 regiments of cavalry, plus supplies, cut through the South to Vicksburg, and the Confederate Army never found them. The biggest skirmish they had was with a bunch of cadets at a military academy. And General Grierson chose to ride away rather than fight. I bring this up because by 1864, the motivation, the anger of the Negro troops had risen. It had risen because of an incident that occurred in Tennessee at a place called Fort Pillow. Now, Fort Pillow was a U.S. earthen fort on the Mississippi manned by Negro heavy artillery, Negro infantry, white artillery, and white infantry. They got into it with the 7th Tennessee and a command under Nathan Bedford Forrest. Enough said about him. In the aftermath, as the Confederates, enraged by the fact that, one, Negroes had actually shot guns at them and didn't want to be their slaves, and that some of these northern Yankee white men had helped them. When the command at Fort Pillow surrendered under conventional warfare, when you surrender, you're taken prisoner. The men who occupied Fort Pillow, white and black, were massacred. Part of the fighting spirit of the 3rd came from no surrender, forward. The men knew, one, either way, if they were outnumbered in a perilous situation, they were going to die. They'd rather die fighting than to get slaughtered. And 2, and the most important thing that is endured to us today, is they were fighting to change history and to change perceptions. I mean, it's easy to say what person, I don't say race. There's only one race, human. We have different cultures in that race, but we all bleed red. Part of the mythology of the period was, well, they don't know nothing. Well, if you've been raised as a slave all your life and not taught to read or write, you can't read or write. That doesn't make you ignorant, it just means you can't read or write. But these men were fighting for the opportunity to learn to read and write. Not just for them, they were laying a foundation. And a lot of people say, well, they're doing it to free black people. No, they were doing it to free America. And a lot of times, to free something, you gotta bleed. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But it was responsibility that the Negro/colored troop was willing to accept. Sergeant Williams will talk about the unit, their organization, and what they mean.
Good evening. My name is Sergeant Williams from the 3rd U.S. Colored Cavalry. I want to take you back in the 1800s, back in the year of 1863, when slavery was still going strong. Back in Mississippi, back in Webster County, Mississippi, the word came that if you would join the U.S. Army, you could become a free man. So we left in droves, headed to a town called Pittsburgh, Mississippi. And this is where they was able to join the U.S. Army. And when we joined the U.S. Army, we joined as the 1st Mississippi Cavalry AD. But in early 1864, the designation changed to the 3rd U.S. Colored Cavalry. These men, after they joined, they trained day in and they trained day out. They just trained, trying to learn the way of the Army. These men had a lot to fight for. They had first to fight for themselves. They had to fight for their families, and they fought for freedom. These men, they was courageous. They were determined. They was superb horsemen. They had a high standard of excellence. They had a high standard of discipline. These men, they done all that they could do because did no one think that they could do what they had been asked to do, to be a soldier, to be a cavalry. So doing this, all this training, they thought they would never get a chance to use the training that they had been trained for. So then one day they got the call for the 3rd U.S. Colored Cavalry. They mounted up and they moved out. They covered areas of southeast Arkansas, northeast Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi. They was all up and down the Yazoo River. And up above the Yazoo River City, they had a fort there. There was about 1,200 troops at this fort. And they went up against about 4,000 Texans, Louisiana, Tennesseans. And they were successful. Out of all the skirmishes, the battles that these men fought in, they were successful. Whatever they needed to do, they were determined to not to be able to go back where they had come from. A lot of blood, sweat, and tears. The determination of no surrender. Whatever they had to do to accomplish the mission that they was on, that's what they were determined to do. These men, as of today, haven't yet got the recognition of being one of the best fighting units during the Civil War. Thank you.
Now, as we talk about the war, you know, General Grant had his campaign against Vicksburg. One of the key to his successes was his U.S. colored troops, because they were able to surround, cut off town by town to give the Union possession of it. Sergeant Williams mentioned Yazoo City. There was also a battle in Arkansas at a place called Haynes Bluff, in addition to the Big Black and in addition to Vicksburg. Before he went east to take command, of the United States troops before Gettysburg, because at the time in the East, the Union was actually losing the war. They had a series of highly publicized but incompetent leaders who wouldn't fight. There were two men over there who wanted to fight, but their leaders wouldn't let them until Grant got there. Then what the Confederates kind of called the evil trio formed. Grant, Sherman, and Sheridan. And Grant told President Lincoln, I know you won't let me, but I wish I could have the fightingest Union cavalry in the army with me. 3rd U.S. Colored. Grant and company formulated a plan to end the war. They were no longer going to fight a gentleman's war, you know, it gets dark, or somebody would stop and have tea and talk about how we're going to fight each other tomorrow. Grant, Sherman, and Sheridan said, we're here to end this war. And they did. Southerners and some Northerners howled about their tactics, burning Atlanta, burning Savannah, burning anything they could get their hands on. But it accomplished the goal they were after. They ended the war. What most people aren't aware of, when Grant took Richmond, as U.S. troops rode into Richmond, does anybody know who the first Union cavalry unit was to ride into the Confederate capital of Richmond? The 5th Massachusetts Colored Cavalry. When the war ended, and Robert E. Lee had to be protected from some of his own people and a lot of Union people, guess who, at his personal bequest, protected Lee and his family? The 5th Massachusetts Colored Cavalry. The fighting prowess of the Negro by 1865 had been proved over and over and beyond a doubt. Surprisingly, though, it was something that would be challenged every war this country got into. The first thing out of certain people's mouths will, don't let the colors in, they're scared to fight. What had happened in the last war meant nothing. Some cases, what had happened to them meant nothing. Ask fighting Joe Hooker. He was a big Confederate general, but he knew about fighting the Negroes. He didn't like it. As later, the country transitioned, and one of our groups, the Buffalo Soldiers, as the black trooper went out west for the first time. That's one of the things the Indians learned. Don't mess with the Buffalo Soldiers, because they fight like us, and they don't back down. What the 3rd U.S., the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th U.S., and the 5th Massachusetts Colored Cavalry did was lay a foundation. That foundation not only changed the course of that war, it helped change the course of that history. Because that's the part of the foundation that this country is built on: diversity, inclusion. If the men during the Civil War, the Negroes, had been the cowards they had been predicted to be, we'd have a different country. Because all of the naysayers would have been proven right. See, they can't handle it. They won't fight. What a lot of them didn't understand was the ancestors of the Negroes that had been kidnapped and brought to America were warriors. That's how they became slaves. They lost in war. Didn't mean they wouldn't fight. They just lost. That was the spirit that infused every U.S. colored troop and every Negro and ethnic troop that has existed in this country since then. Up to today, we've actually had a black commander, supreme commander of the United States Army. It's built on that foundation of the U.S. colored troops during the Civil War. As you can see looking at us, I think Trooper Wilder is our spring chicken. He's young. And in reality, during that time period, he's the only one that could have been in the cavalry. The rest of us would have had to walk, because we were too big. Horses are too big. But with that in mind, we have bigger horses. And we carry on in the spirit, and hopefully in the education of the public, to the deeds of these men that we want everyone to know about. So, added to your knowledge of Gettysburg, Bull Run, you can add Haynes Bluff, Yazoo City, and Big Black River Bridge. With that done, that is what we hope to accomplish in enlightening Americans about America. With all that being said and done, as members of the 3rd U.S. Colored Cavalry living history, we thank you.
Okay, well, hey, it's not over, but you guys are going to get to take home something right here. Sergeant Russell, Bill Wilder, okay, Trooper, Callie, and Williams. Would you hold those up? And we're going to take your picture for our newsletter right here.
I'm having real trouble with these legs getting the pictures, so I will.
Step out. There we go. There we go. But traditionally, we take a break halfway through the thing, and we've got refreshments over here. So what we'll do during the break is get something to eat. I believe our troopers will be available for conversation. Come over here to Falcon and buy a chance for getting a book for our raffle. And probably in about 15 minutes or so, we'll come back and perhaps have a question and answer session with our guests. Does that sound all right, Sergeant Russell?
Yes, sir.
Good. All right, let's do that. Rick, we got any?
Don't move anybody place.
Oh, okay. We'll just start at one end and up yourself.
I